The Texas sun burned high over the dusty auction yard, where a handful of tired men leaned against weathered rails, boots scuffing the dirt. At the far end of the corral, a pale horse, ribs sharp under a dull ghost-white coat, stood trembling, head low, flanks heaving with each shallow breath. His name wasn't spoken yet, but old folks whispered it later, Wildfire. To these men, he was just another burden not worth a single dollar. Huck Calloway, broad-shouldered and bearded, watched from the shadows near the gate. He hadn't come to buy a horse. He'd come to sell a pair of old saddles for feed money. But Huck's eyes locked on the sickly gelding, and something in that hollow stare dragged up a memory of another time. A promise he'd made long ago to Dalton Rollins, the friend he'd buried under an oak tree 10 winters back. Never turn your back on something that still has fight left in it. Sawyer Kincaid, the smooth-talking auctioneer, wiped sweat from his brow and barked over the restless murmur of the crowd. $1, gentlemen. Someone do me a mercy. Take this ghost off my hands. Ridge Bannister, Huck's old friend, shook his head beside him, muttering, "Don't be a fool, Huck. He's good as gone. Let him go." But Huck didn't hear. His chest tightened. He pictured Dalton laughing in the saddle, a blur of dust and hooves. Wildfire once ran like no other. Rumor was he'd been lost in a bet, worked to the bone until he broke. Now no one wanted the ruin he'd become. Huck stepped forward without a word. The other men fell silent as his boots stirred the dry dust. He dug a crumpled $5 bill from his back pocket, dropped it in Sawyer's sweaty hand, and pushed through the gate. The smell of sickness and old sweat hit him hard as he approached the trembling horse. Wildfire's ears twitched weakly, but he didn't shy away. Huck whispered, "Easy, boy, it's me and you now." Behind him, Knox Hargrave, a young ranch hand who looked up to Huck more than he'd admit, leaned on the rail beside Ridge. "He's gonna ruin himself over that horse," Knox murmured. Ridge just sighed, arms crossed, watching Huck press a steady palm to Wildfire's scarred neck. A few men snorted under their breath, calling Huck a sentimental fool, but none dared say it too loud. With each unsteady step away from the corral, Huck felt the weight of every eye on his back. He didn't care. As Wildfire leaned his bony shoulder into Huck's leg, something fragile and forgotten flickered awake in the rancher's chest. The men behind him would say he was chasing ghosts. But deep down, Huck knew this dying horse wasn't finished yet, and neither was he. Huck Calloway drove the rattling old trailer back toward his ranch as the late afternoon sun dipped low behind a stretch of cottonwoods. Inside the cramped trailer, Wildfire swayed unsteadily, every pothole in the dirt road jarring his fragile frame. Huck's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Ridge Bannister's words still echoed in his mind. "Don't drag another dying thing home, Huck. You can't save them all." But Huck couldn't help it. He'd failed Dalton once. He wouldn't fail this horse too. As the ranch gate creaked open, Huck spotted Knox Hargrave waiting by the barn, arms folded tight, worry plain on his young face. The boy had chores to finish before sundown, but his eyes were fixed on the battered trailer. Huck killed the engine, stepped out, and grunted, "Open the back." "Slow. He's barely holdin' on." Knox obeyed without a word, his boots crunching on gravel. Inside, Wildfire stood with legs splayed wide, head bobbing low, but when Huck whispered his name, the horse's ears flicked and a breathy snort escaped his flared nostrils. A spark, faint but there. Together, Huck and Knox guided Wildfire down the ramp. Each step looked like it might be his last, but the gelding pressed closer to Huck's side, drawing calm from the big man's steady hand. By the time they reached the paddock, the orange sun had slipped behind the trees, and the sky burned purple. Knox latched the gate and leaned on the fence, watching Wildfire nose the dry earth for a patch of grass. "He's bones and fever," Knox said quietly. "What if he doesn't make it through the night?" Huck didn't answer right away. He rested his arms on the fence rail, eyes locked on the hollow flank that rose and fell like a slow drumbeat. Inside his chest, doubt coiled like a rattler. The ranch was one payment away from foreclosure. Feed prices were up, good help was scarce, and now he brought home another mouth too weak to chew hay. Huck forced the thought away and said, "If there's breath, there's hope." "That's all I need tonight." Knox nodded, though worry lingered in the crease between his brows. In the hush of dusk, Wildfire lifted his head, meeting Huck's gaze for just a heartbeat, and for that small moment the burden felt lighter. Later, by the dim light of a single barn lantern, Huck mixed a mash of warm oats and medicine Dr. Cyrus Maddox had scribbled on a torn scrap of paper. The old vet hadn't even charged him, just muttered, "A fool's mercy, but sometimes mercy surprises you." Huck sat cross-legged on a hay bale, watching Wildfire nudge the bucket, each mouthful a quiet fight against the darkness pressing in around them. He thought of Dalton Rollins, of promises left to rot with the bones of old friendships. Outside the barn, an early frost crept over the pastures, silvering the fence posts and dead grass. Inside, Huck's eyelids drooped as Wildfire's labored chewing filled the shadows with the sound of hope fighting to stay alive. Tomorrow would come with fresh doubts, fresh debts, fresh rumors. But tonight, Huck let the weight slip off his shoulders, just for a moment, and told himself, "This time, I won't lose him. Not this time." By dawn, a thin fog clung to the low fields surrounding Huck Calloway's ranch. Inside the paddock, Wildfire stood on shaky legs, his breath steaming in the cold air. Huck leaned against the fence, a battered thermos of coffee warming his hands. Every few minutes, the horse would stumble, then steady himself again, driven by something Huck recognized all too well, a stubborn refusal to die quietly. Knox Hargrave trudged up the dirt path, jacket buttoned to his chin, boots crusted with frost. He stopped beside Huck, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "He made it through the night," Knox said, half relieved, half amazed. Huck only nodded, too tired for words. His mind ticked through the chores he'd ignored yesterday. Mending fences, checking the back pasture, the overdue call to the bank. None of it seemed more urgent than the thin horse fighting for each mouthful of hay in front of him. They didn't hear Ridge Bannister ride up until the squeal of saddle leather broke the morning quiet. Ridge swung down from his mare, face creased in disapproval. "Sheriff Fletcher Baines came by my place," Ridge said flatly. "Word's out you took that horse. Folks are saying it ain't rightly yours." Huck's shoulders stiffened. "Sawyer Kincaid auctioned him fair. I paid what he asked." Ridge snorted, spitting into the grass. "Doesn't matter to Briggs Whitmore. He's claimin' you stole Wildfire from a debt settlement. He wants him back, or he'll take it to court." Huck's got twisted. Briggs Whitmore had money, lawyers, and a mean streak as wide as the prairie. Knox cursed under his breath. "You gonna give him up?" The question burned in the frosty air. Huck looked past them, to where Wildfire stood with his bony head bent low, tail flicking weakly at flies. "No," Huck said finally. His voice was soft but solid as stone. "I've given up too much already. Not him." Ridge kicked at the frozen dirt, frustration etched deep in his weathered face. "Then brace yourself. Briggs doesn't let go easy. He'll push. Sheriff Baines can't ignore a claim like that." Huck ran a hand through his hair, coarse and matted from sleep stolen in the barn loft. He knew Ridge was right. He also knew that in this town, truth bent to money faster than fences bent to wind. If Briggs wanted a fight, he'd get one, but Huck feared how much more he stood to lose. As Ridge rode off and Knox headed to the main barn, Huck stayed by the fence, staring at Wildfire's flickering strength. Somewhere deep down, an old voice, Dalton Rollins' laugh, clear as summer thunder, rose in his memory. "Some things are worth the scars, Huck." He breathed deep, tasting the cold, and whispered back, "Then let him come for us." The following afternoon, a heavy silence settled over the ranch. Clouds gathered low, promising a cold rain that might turn the dirt yard to soup by nightfall. Huck Calloway worked alone in the paddock, brushing the caked mud from Wildfire's coat. Each pass of the brush pulled out loose hair and lifted clouds of old dust, but Huck didn't flinch. Every soft stroke felt like scrubbing away the past, for the horse and for himself. Knox Hargrave sat perched on the fence rail, watching with quiet awe. Wildfire's ribs still jutted like broken pickets, but there was a flicker in the gelding's eyes now, a glint that hadn't been there when Huck had first led him home. "He's stronger today," Knox said, unable to hide the hope in his voice. Huck nodded without looking up. "He wants to live. Long as he wants it, I'll keep fighting with him." The boy grinned, though worry still tugged at the corners of his mouth. Huck knew Knox carried the same fear he did, that this fragile recovery could vanish overnight. The scrape of tires on gravel snapped both their heads up. A battered black pickup rolled slowly through the ranch gate, its engine coughing before it died near the barn. Out stepped Sheriff Fletcher Baines, tall, broad-chested, hat pulled low over sharp eyes. Huck set the brush aside, wiped his hands on his jeans, and squared his shoulders. Baines always came polite, but he never came without purpose. "Afternoon, Huck," Baines called, his voice even but weighty. Knox hopped down from the fence, nervous energy humming in his restless feet. Huck forced a thin smile. "Sheriff, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Baines glanced past him to Wildfire, who watched the newcomer warily with his thin neck stretched. The sheriff sighed. "Briggs Whitmore filed a claim this morning. Says Wildfire's legally his, part of the Rollins debt that was never paid when Dalton died. Says Sawyer sold him without authority." Huck's jaw tightened at Dalton's name, sharp as barbed wire in his chest. "Dalton's been dead near a decade. That debt died with him. Wildfire ain't Briggs's horse to claim." Baines spread his hands. "I believe you. Hell, half the town does. But if Briggs pushes this to court, you'll lose, Huck. You know how this works. Man with the bigger wallet writes the ending." The sheriff's voice softened, regret in every word. "Don't make this worse than it has to be." The threat behind the kindness wasn't lost on Huck. Knox stepped closer, ready to bark back, but Huck laid a calming hand on the boy's shoulder. He locked eyes with Baines and spoke low, steady, every word a vow. "Sheriff, tell Briggs if he wants to put his hands on this horse, he'll have to step over me first." Neither man blinked. Rain began to patter on the barn roof, a soft drumbeat over the pounding in Huck's chest. Somewhere behind them, Wildfire lifted his head against the drizzle, a creature who had known cruelty but refused to bow to it again. Rain fell steady through the night, turning the paddock into a patchwork of soggy earth and standing water. By dawn, Huck Calloway was already ankle-deep in mud, hauling fresh straw into Wildfire's shelter. The horse, ribs still sharp but eyes clearer, stood close, flicking his ears at every thunderclap that rolled across the low hills. Huck worked in silence, jaw clenched, mind racing with Baines's warning, "Man with the bigger wallet writes the ending." Not this time, Huck told himself again and again. Inside the barn, Knox Hargrave watched through the open door, hands buried in his pockets. He'd never seen Huck like this, restless, shoulders tense, talking low to Wildfire as if the horse were the only thing keeping him anchored to the ground. Knox hated how powerless he felt. "Huck," he called over the rain's steady hiss, "you gotta have a plan. Briggs'll be here soon, and he won't come alone." Huck didn't answer at first. He lifted Wildfire's feed bucket, checked the mash, and said without looking up, "Plans cost money, Knox. All I got is fight." Knox wanted to argue but bit it back. He knew Huck too well. The man never asked for help, never complained about bad land or bad luck. To watch him brace for another loss made something twist in the boy's gut. He turned on his heel and stomped off toward the house, muttering, "We'll see about that." Huck didn't stop him. He pressed a palm to Wildfire's damp neck and felt the warmth there. Stubborn, real. "Long as you stand, I stand," he whispered. By mid-morning, The sound of an engine on wet gravel made Huck straighten. Ridge Bannister rode up beside Briggs Whitmore's shiny black pickup. Behind the wheel, Briggs sat like a king in a metal throne, grinning under a wide-brimmed hat. He stepped out, boots sinking into the mud, eyes sweeping the paddock with a predator's ease. "Mornin', Huck," Briggs called, voice all false cheer. "Thought I'd come settle this neighborly, man to man." Huck didn't flinch. He stepped between Briggs and the fence where Wildfire waited, flanks trembling from the cold drizzle. Ridge climbed down from his horse, staying close but silent, an ally, though both knew Ridge hated trouble. Briggs spread his arms wide like a preacher. "That horse is mine by law. I'll pay you back the $5, plus a mercy fee. Be smart, Calloway. Hand him over and we both walk away clean." A crack of thunder rolled overhead, fitting for the dread boiling in Huck's belly. He stared Briggs down, boots rooted in the churned-up mud. "Wildfire's mine now. You had your chance to care for him. You didn't. I did." Briggs's grin vanished, replaced by a cold sneer. "Then you best brace yourself, old friend. Next time I come, it won't be talkin'd." Rain dripped from the brim of Huck's hat as he watched Briggs retreat to his truck. Somewhere behind him, Wildfire nickered low, the sound like a promise Huck clung to with both hands. Huck Calloway barely slept that night. The storm rattled the tin roof of the old barn where he dragged a cot to keep watch over Wildfire. Every creak of the wind made him sit up, half expecting Briggs Whitmore's headlights to sweep over the yard. Wildfire, curled on a bed of fresh straw, slept fitfully, ears twitching, hooves kicking at ghosts only he could see. Huck watched him breathe, counting each rise and fall as proof that not all things broken had to stay that way. Before dawn, Huck lit the old kerosene lamp and sat hunched at a workbench littered with scraps of paper. Old debt notes from Dalton Rollins, yellowed with time and stained with sweat. The numbers mocked him. Dalton's charm had gotten them into trouble more than once. His friendship had been a rope around Huck's neck long before the man ended up in the ground. Wildfire was the last remnant of that reckless loyalty, a debt no bank could collect, but that Huck's conscience refused to forget. A soft knock at the barn door startled him. Ridge Bannister slipped in, had dripping rainwater onto the dirt floor. He closed the door behind him, eyeing the scattered papers. "You're still fightin' ghosts, Huck," Ridge said, voice low but sharp. Huck rubbed his eyes, weary. "Briggs wants what was Dalton's, Ridge, and that includes Wildfire. But that horse don't owe him a damn thing. Neither do I." Ridge stepped closer, the smell of wet leather and hay between them. "Then stop hiding in this barn. Briggs is tellin' folks you're a thief and a drunk. If you won't defend yourself, you'll lose more than that horse." Knox Hargrave appeared in the doorway next, breathless, face flushed from the cold. "Sheriff Baines is out front. Says Briggs filed papers with the judge this morning. He's got a writ. He can take Wildfire, Huck, legal or not." The barn seemed to shrink around Huck. He glanced back at Wildfire, who lifted his head at the sound of voices, eyes bright with that stubborn spark. Rage and dread wrestled inside Huck's chest. He'd watched too many good things slip through his fingers. His father's land, Dalton's friendship, Mary's laughter, and now this horse, this chance to make right what once went wrong. Huck stood, the old cot groaning under the sudden shift. "Tell Baines I'll talk to him," he said to Knox, voice like gravel dragged through a riverbed. Ridge grabbed his arm, eyes flaring with an old friend's loyalty. "Don't do something foolish, Huck." Huck pulled free, straightening to his full, broad height. "Too late for that." He stepped past them into the chill dawn air, the barn door banging shut behind him. Outside, the wind cut through his coat as he spotted Sheriff Baines by the truck, writ in hand, hat pulled low. Huck's boots sank into the wet earth with each step. He knew this wouldn't end with paper and polite words, not with Briggs lurking behind every corner, grinning in the shadows. Somewhere inside the barn, Wildfire nickered, and Huck felt his backbone stiffen. He was done paying for another man's sins. The early morning sky hung heavy with bruised clouds as Huck Calloway squared his shoulders in front of Sheriff Fletcher Baines. The sheriff stood by his truck, flipping through the folded writ with the reluctant care of a man who hated his own orders. Behind him, Briggs Whitmore's black pickup idled, exhaust curling like a serpent in the cold. Huck felt the weight of Ridge Bannister's presence at his back and Knox hovering by the barn, fists jammed deep in his coat pockets. "Huck," Baines began, voice gruff but steady, "I hate this as much as you do." But the judge signed it. By law, Wildfire's property tied to the Rollins debt. Briggs has a right to claim him. Huck's jaw flexed so hard it hurt. He glanced at Briggs, leaning against his shiny truck with a snake oil grin, relishing every second. The sight made Huck's blood boil. "He was rotting in that auction yard," Huck snapped, voice low but sharp as a whip. "Nobody cared then. I did, and I'll keep caring." Baines looked away, uneasy. "Law don't bend for good intentions. You know that." Ridge stepped forward, placing a hand on Huck's arm to keep him from lunging. "Easy, brother. Think smart, not angry." But Huck's patience, worn thin by sleepless nights and old ghosts, frayed completely in that moment. He pulled free, boots sinking into wet mud as he strode past Baines toward Briggs. Briggs straightened, the smugness slipping a notch when he saw Huck's eyes, cold, clear, unyielding. "Back off, Whitmore," Huck growled. "You want this horse, you drag me with him. Or you put me down here and now." Briggs scoffed but didn't step closer. The tension crackled in the damp air like a storm ready to break. Knox, heart pounding, whispered to Ridge, "He'll really fight him, won't he?" Ridge nodded once, eyes locked on his oldest friend. "He damn well will." Behind the small crowd, neighbors began to gather along the fence line. Curious farmers, ranch hands, even Martha Briggs from the diner. Word spread fast in a town like theirs. They saw a beaten-down man stand his ground for a broken-down horse, and something in that stubborn image made a few tighten their jaws and cross their arms in quiet solidarity. Briggs saw it too, the subtle shift of weight, the hush that carried more threat than any shout. Sheriff Baines cleared his throat, eyes darting from Huck to the growing cluster of onlookers. "Let's not do this here, Huck," he murmured, low enough so only Huck and Ridge heard. But Huck's stare never wavered from Briggs. "Then tell him to leave. Wildfire stays." Briggs, sensing the shift, spat into the mud and muttered, "This ain't over, Calloway. I'll be back." Huck didn't answer. He stood rooted in the mud as the black truck rolled away, feeling Wildfire's distant nicker echo the new steel in his own spine. For once, he wasn't alone in this fight. 2 days passed with a tense calm clinging to Huck Calloway's ranch like fog. The word around town was clear. Briggs Whitmore would return with papers, muscle, or both. Huck barely left Wildfire's side, sleeping in the hay, feeding the gelding small portions every few hours. Ridge Bannister and Knox Hargrave stayed close too, working chores Huck didn't have the breath to think about. By the third sunrise, Wildfire stood taller than he had since Huck first laid eyes on him. Knox sat cross-legged outside the paddock, watching the once frail horse test his legs with cautious steps. "You ever seen him like this?" he asked Ridge, who leaned on the fence with arms folded. Ridge shook his head slowly. "Not since Dalton's days. Back then, that horse outran storms. Folks called him Wildfire, 'cause he'd vanish into the hills like wind through dry grass." His voice caught on the memory. "Hard to kill a spirit like that." Inside the paddock, Huck coaxed Wildfire into a slow circle, the lead rope slack between them. Each step stirred up old mud and new hope. Huck murmured encouragement under his breath. The sight made something tighten in Knox's chest, a mix of wonder and fear. He turned to Ridge. "If Briggs comes back with the sheriff again, can we really stop him?" Ridge didn't answer right away. He watched Huck's hand stroke Wildfire's neck, watched the horse flick his ears and toss his head with a flicker of the wild thing he'd once been. "Maybe we won't have to," Ridge said finally. They didn't hear the pickup crunching up the drive until it was nearly at the gate. Briggs Whitmore, true to his threat, stepped out, this time with 2 ranch hands flanking him, bigger men with cold eyes. Sheriff Baines trailed behind, hat pulled low, shoulders tight with dread. Huck straightened, dropping the lead rope as Ridge and Knox moved up to stand at his sides. This time, the fear in Huck's gut burned clean into anger. Briggs swaggered closer, gesturing at Wildfire like he was pointing at a bag of oats. "Last chance, Calloway. Hand him over before this turns real ugly. Sheriff here won't stop me from taking what's mine." Baines winced but didn't deny it. For a heartbeat, the paddock was so quiet that even the restless snort of Wildfire carried like thunder. Huck stepped forward, voice clear enough for the gathering neighbors to hear. "You see that horse? Look at him stand. He's worth more free than you'll ever own caged. If you want him, you'll drag my bones with him." Knox, trembling but fierce, shouted, "And mine too." Ridge grinned despite himself. From the fence line, a handful of townsfolk, folks who once whispered that Huck was wasting his life, crossed into the yard, folding their arms, blocking Briggs's path without saying a word. Wildfire, feeling the tension, tossed his head high, pawed the ground, and let out a sharp, defiant whinny that cut through the Texas dusk like a promise that he and Huck wouldn't bow again. The late afternoon sun sank low behind drifting clouds as tension crackled in the paddock. Briggs Whitmore stood at the gate, 2 hired men at his flanks, Sheriff Baines shifting uneasily beside them. On the other side, Huck Calloway, Ridge Bannister, and Knox Hargrave stood firm, back straight, boots planted deep in the churned earth. Behind them, half the town crowded along the fence, their breath misting in the cool air. The wordless line they formed was louder than any gun. Briggs sneered at the sight of Martha Briggs Whitmore, his own cousin by marriage, crossing her arms with the others, her apron still dusted with flour from the diner. "You think this show of loyalty scares me?" Briggs barked, pointing a fat finger at Huck. "I got a writ, Calloway. You can't hide behind these fools forever." Sheriff Baines flinched but didn't move. He'd done all he could. Now he seemed content to watch which way the wind would blow. Huck's voice carried through the hush. "You didn't want him when he was dying. You don't deserve him now that he wants to live." As if on cue, Wildfire stamped a hoof, tossing his head, the ghost of his old spirit flickering bright. A murmur rippled through the watchers. Some even smiled. Ridge leaned close to Huck and whispered, "I've never seen a horse turn a crowd like this one. He's got more fight than any of us." Briggs motioned to his men. "Take him. Get this over with." The 2 brutes stepped forward, but so did Ridge, Knox, and 3 other ranchers, forming a solid human wall in the mud. One of the brutes hesitated, glancing back at Briggs, suddenly less sure. Wildfire reared slightly behind Huck, nostrils flaring, muscles quivering under his patchy coat. It wasn't just a sick horse now. It was a symbol that even the beaten could rise when folks stood together. In the silence that followed, Martha's clear voice cut through the tension. "Briggs Whitmore, you lay one finger on that horse, and you'll answer to every soul in this valley. You forget, we know what you did with Dalton Rollins's debts. We know how you twist the law. Not today." A murmur of agreement rose behind her. Knox, breathless, felt his fear dissolve into something hotter. Courage. Briggs's face flushed crimson as he realized his power was slipping away, one pair of boots at a time. Sheriff Baines cleared his throat, voice oddly calm. "Seems you're outnumbered, Briggs. Maybe let the horse stay where he belongs." Wildfire whinnied again, a sound that danced over the field like thunder chasing lightning. And beside him, Huck stood taller than he had in years, shoulders squared against every shadow that had ever tried to break him. The sun dipped behind the hills as Briggs Whitmore, red-faced and breathing hard, realized he was beaten, not by law, but by the simple truth standing firm in front of him. Huck Calloway didn't flinch when Briggs spat in the dirt and barked, "You think this changes anything? You'll be back in debt soon enough. This ranch can't feed that bag of bones forever." But Huck just wiped his brow, eyes calm. "Maybe so. But at least he's free here. And so am I." Sheriff Baines, watching the townsfolk shoulder to shoulder, tucked the useless writ back into his coat. He clapped Briggs's arm in mock sympathy. "Go on home, Briggs. Best you forget this horse. Folks around here remember who stands for what." Briggs, cheeks burning in the fading light, stormed to his truck with his men trailing behind like whipped dogs. The engine coughed to life, kicking gravel as they disappeared down the muddy road. A cheer rose from the fence line, soft at first, then rolling louder as relief spread like dawn over the valley. Wildfire, sensing the shift, tossed his head and pranced stiffly around Huck, testing legs that had once nearly given up. Knox laughed, wiping rain and sweat from his brow. "Look at him, Huck. He knows he won." Huck ran a rough hand down the gelding's warm neck, feeling the beat of life that refused to quit. Ridge slapped Huck's back with a grin that cracked years off his weary face. "You old fool. You gave us all a backbone today." As the crowd drifted back home, lanterns flickering like fireflies along the dirt road, Martha Briggs lingered by the paddock gate. She caught Huck's hand, squeezing it tight. This town needed to remember what it means to stand up together. "You reminded us. Don't forget it yourself." Huck only nodded, words stuck behind the tightness in his throat. He looked past her to where Wildfire sniffed at the fresh hay Knox had spread. In that simple scene, he saw more hope than in any banknote or signed deed. That night, under a sky clear for the first time in days, Huck sat by Wildfire's paddock. The horse lay in the straw, eyes half closed, breath deep and even. For the first time in years, Huck let himself believe he hadn't just saved a dying horse. He'd saved a piece of himself buried beneath debts and old regrets. He thought of Dalton Rollins, of mistakes forgiven too late, and let the silence between stars fill the empty spaces in his chest. When dawn broke, golden and soft over the pastures, Ridge found Huck asleep against the fence post, Wildfire standing guard beside him. Ridge didn't wake him. Some victories didn't need trumpets or crowds, just a man, a horse, and the land that shaped them both. And as Wildfire turned his head toward the rising sun, the valley seemed to breathe easier, knowing that sometimes broken things could stand again, stronger, freer, right where they belong.